Right, good morning. Welcome back to part 2 of our walk up the Great Central Railway line up the Worsbrough Incline. We'll be walking from Worsbrough Dale Crossing up to Strafford Main Crossing, having a look at what sort of stuff is at the side of the line. The derelict land we're looking at here was a former sawmill, according to the maps. I believe it was canal served pre-railway. Buried among that undergrowth is a canal wharf. This clearing we're approaching was where the canal crossed under the railway. The bridge has long since been removed and filled in. However, we can see in the bottom there the dried up canal bed. Just make out the route there through the trees. There are a number of stones around here which presumably were part of the bridge. It's still in water for a short stretch. I'll just turn you around. That's looking back towards Worsbrough Res. So this is the site of Glasshouse Crossing. Just on the right across there was a crossing box. So where we're walking now was originally a goods yard. There would have been a goods shed here. The line itself was further to right. We're just approaching Worsbrough Bridge crossing. A signal box would have been just there on the left. And that would have been the crossing keeper's cottage. The footbridge we're approaching went down to Wbury Mill. We can just see evidence of where it was lifted to allow clearance for the overhead line equipment following electrification. We're just at the site of Worsbrough Res. This was built to keep the Worsbrough arm of the Dern and Duff Canal topped up. It looks like they're having some work done, it's partially drained. We're just approaching Kendall Green Crossing. Again, there was a small signal box stood there on the left, I believe. This was originally the crossing keeper's cottage, like in the gate. So just down to the left here was Kendall Green Drift. We know that because we found this vent pipe ventilating gases out of the mine. It was sunk in the 1950s, but didn't last very long, closing in 1958. I don't think there's any remains, but we'll have a look. Other than a few earthworks and a few stones, there's very little remaining here, to be fair. That will be the approximate site of the drift. Not to be confused with Kendall Green Colliery, which sat in the field just to the north of the line. This had closed in the 1920s. It was also known as Prince Albert Colliery. The only remaining building on the drift site is this pump lodge. It was possibly in use long after the pit had closed. The EM1 locomotives were designed specifically for this route. They operated at 1500 volts DC and were fitted with 4 traction motors, generating a total of 1868 horsepower. Besides air brakes, the locomotives were fitted with regenerative braking. When running downhill, the motors acted as generators and fed power back into the overhead lines, this power being used to assist locomotives coming up the incline. We're in a bit of a cutting now as we approach Hound Bridge. You can just see it there in the trees. We'll have a look when we get a bit closer. So this is where Hound Hill crosses. Obviously this will have been replaced for electrification. You can still see some brackets hung down, which would have supported the overhead line equipment. And some wall hangers running through the bridge itself there. I'm not sure if this camera's picking it up, but we're just starting to climb a little bit now. This particular section we're on now, I remember in the mid-90s, just on the left, a sewer pipe was buried along here. Major undertaking, as I recall. Obviously, a lot of the infrastructure will have been destroyed when they did that. Saw plenty of these little guys. We found what looks like a gradient post, abandoned in a farmer's field. Yeah, I think this is evidence of what I was talking about earlier with the drains. This is just a land drain. It goes under the track in a culvert. So we're now coming quite close to the M1 motorway. Just have a look over here. That green footbridge there crosses the motorway. Up on the hillside, I don't know if you can see. That's bring it into focus. That's Wentworth Castle. There's quite a lot of infrastructure buried under here. We've seen sleepers, concrete fence posts, and lots of other stuff. A gradient post still survives. This is Robroid Crossing. These concrete supports were for the overhead line equipment. That's the Motorway Bridge coming up. Just before we cross, I believe down to the left here was the site of Robroid Colliery. We'll have a look. We can see a few remains of the buildings. I believe this was operational until the early 1960s, but remained as a pumping shaft until the late 80s, being connected to both Barra and Dorothy collieries. We did find the shaft. Water level is about 25 metres below the surface, but the shaft itself goes down much further. Moving on to the Motorway Bridge. This is looking south towards Sheffield. And this is looking north towards Leeds. We're once again in the cutting as we approach Gilrod Lane. Like down at Hound Hill, we can see where this was lifted to give clearance. It looks like originally it may have been a steel span bridge and it was replaced by concrete in the 50s. There's some pretty elaborate brackets up there for the overhead line equipment. Again, at one time it would have had wall brackets on. Some have been salvaged and weighed in for scrap, no doubt. See the bolts where they were. Starting to see a few boundary markers on the track side. Haven't seen them for a while. Just to our left was a series of sidings for the nearby Strafford Colliery, no doubt just for holding coal wagons. Again, a lot of the railway infrastructure has been buried. We found sleepers, points and a signal post in among the trees. We're now approaching Strafford Crossing. This was a foot crossing, not a vehicle crossing. That's looking up towards Gilroyd. And that's the track bed up to West Silkston Junction. What we'll do, we'll finish part 2 for now. We'll return with part 3 and continue from here right up to West Silkston Junction. Hope you found it interesting. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in part 3.